What is the meaning of President Donald Trump leaving G7 summit early? What will be the consequences associated with it? And where is the multilateralism and unilateralism going in the world? What is the role of US in Iran and Israel conflict? US President Donald Trump exits G7 summit early, apparently to handle the escalation that we are seeing in West Asia. But this is not just a random singular act that we are seeing, but this is a series of events that have lined up where the common thing has been behavior of Donald Trump exiting deals, summit and commitments. Hello everyone, welcome to Vajiram and Ravi's Simplified. My name is Shubhangi Singh and today we are going to understand that how this exit of Donald Trump from G7 summit highlights the fact that he has been exiting from multiple places, and this early exit from G7 summit will have certain consequences which we need to look out for. Not just as an economy in individuality, but also in the terms of global order and the messages that could have been sent across. So let us start with understanding basically how many times we have seen this pattern of exit by Donald Trump, because this is not the first and singular act which is coming from his side. It was the same forum we are talking about today, G7, and there was an early exit again in 2018 itself. In 2018 itself, where he refused to endorse the joint communique that came out of that particular summit, and he walked out early as it was done in the G7 summit of 2025 again. After that, we have also seen multiple such incidents. For example, Paris Climate Accord. He withdrew from this accord, and this was done in 2017, where one of the biggest economies and the most important one withdrew, and it weakened global climate commitments. That means this clearly highlights where US was supposed to be present to give a message to fulfill its purposes. There have been places, not in just this term, where Donald Trump has came with surprise multiple reciprocal tariffs. There have been places in his past term also where we have seen such exits and surprises, which was another one during a dark time that we saw as humankind of COVID-19 pandemic. And again, there was a withdrawal from President Donald Trump, that too from the World Organization, that is World Health Organization, WHO. When we are talking about World Health Organization, this withdrawal came in the peak time when COVID-19 was taking away lives like if there were toys, and it also drew a lot of global criticism. And this pattern did not stop after that as well. There has been withdrawal of US from Iran nuclear deal in 2018, which is one of the reasons of the escalated tensions that we see today in terms of Israel-Iran conflict. Apart from that, if we come to the conclusion of this pattern of exits that we are seeing, it clearly comes from the fact, be it either of terms of President Donald Trump, that he is focusing on making America great again, and his approach was and will be America first. He has clearly prioritized his domestic issues and optics over what is required and important for the bigger picture, for the global order, and with total disregard what can be done as a community, as a unit and as a grouping. Now that we have seen the incidents in past where this exit pattern of Donald Trump has been established, let us look into this present exit that we are talking about. This present exit comes from the G7 summit, which is happening in Canada as of now, in the Alberta region, in the city of Kananaskis, and this summit was important because of the multiple crises that lie in front of us. Even before the closing scenarios and meetings could take place and a joint statement declaration could come out, President Donald Trump had taken the exit. This has disrupted the climate talk because he clearly refused to agree on climate finance or any such targets which will affect US in terms of its economic goals. Apart from that, the Middle East strategy, where G7 had the opportunity to come out together as a bloc and bring out their response to this Iran-Israel war which is going on, that opportunity was totally foregone by. Furthermore, there is a clear allied discontent. Why we are saying allied discontent? The allies of US, they have got together and they are not happy with this particular move. Not only they could come to a consensus, but they could not also release a joint declaration. But there was also discontentment about where there was Ukrainian President Zelensky who was expecting a conversation with the president so that there can be some package deliveries, some relief to Ukraine which could be seen, but that was also denied. So all such things have pent up, and this early exit cannot be just seen as a mere incident. Rather, it has become a signature style where Trump is clearly trying to put his domestic optics over the international global bigger interest. But this is also an incident which will have a lot of repercussions for the global community, which we will be talking about from here on. Now, when we are talking about this particular exit that Donald Trump has taken, when this happened, it is not those particular member countries and guest members who were involved and who were there for meetings, and there were certain joint declaration, consensus meetings, climate agreements that were left off. But there is a bigger issue where you have to understand that it weakens the global response. So G7 as a bloc itself, when we are talking about the biggest elitist economies together, they have failed in terms of reaching to a consensus and what there is as an action or reaction, especially on the Israel-Iran conflict, because it needs immediate attention and response as well. Now, just because of this early exit, there was no consensus on any sort of declaration, be it trade, be it security or climate that I have mentioned. And because of this exit and the pattern that we talked about initially, there is absolute loss of credibility, especially for US. All the allies, they are clearly discontented and they know that they cannot rely on the American leadership anymore. And that is what makes this exit a point in history to be understood that marked a pattern for US non-credibility. US has always the credibility in terms of the biggest economy, in terms of the player who is trying to establish democracies in one way or the other across the globe. But that credibility seems to be lost because of the actions of President Donald Trump. Apart from that, there is a clear India-EU step up that we are seeing. Emerging powers, including India, they will be here to fill up this void that has been created, because G7, as it is failing to come up to the benchmark that it set, it has failed to deliver on a consensus. That is where it leaves a vacuum, and this vacuum gives space for developing countries such as India. It gives space for communities, it gives space for groups and forums such as EU to step up and fill this void that is present in terms of international policy. And this exit has also damaged the long-term trust and long-term multilateral and cooperation efforts that have taken place since decades. So when G7 remains defunct, you have to understand, whenever we are talking about other forums bigger than that, G8, G20, they are also perceived defunct. They will also be seen that there is no point to such multilateral groupings, which brings in the question that has multilateralism lost its charm? Have we come to bilateral and minilateralism? So that would be a question for you also, that is, have we arrived in the era of bilateralism and minilateralism? Now this brings us to understand that apparently US left early, President Donald Trump left early so as to ensure mediation and to make sure the situation, the escalation that is happening between Iran and Israel is apparently President Donald Trump left to address the escalating situation between Israel and Iran. But the question is, what exactly is the role of US in this particular conflict, especially under President Donald Trump? So the role here is basically of an ally of this particular country, Israel, in which US stands with full support. So US has backed Operation Rising Lion, and they have been very clear, Operation Rising Lion is something that comes with full support from US, and it has not been cleared with G7 and it lacks the backing of G7. But President Donald Trump has gone out and shown full support to Operation Rising Lion. Let me point out that it was Operation Rising Lion in the early hours of June 13, which was basically the starting point of this whole conflict. Other than that, President Donald Trump has also shown support to Iran, where he has asked people to evacuate Tehran, which is the capital of Iran, and he has warned that the capital city will see a Saddam Hussein-like fate, Saddam Hussein-like end. There have been also multiple evacuation calls where Iranians have been asked to leave the city. And that was not it. US has gone ahead without its allies and it remains isolated in its stance. Be it all of its allies, including EU, India, we all are talking about diplomacy, where US has been one particular country which has been responsible for fueling this fire. Now, there has been further no de-escalation attempts which we have seen. There has been clear refusal of any sort of mediation, and the US stance has been isolated as well. Now that we have understood the G7 exit of, early G7 exit of President Donald Trump, Israel-Iran conflict and US role in it, now let us talk about the implications, what we will see for global order. The first and most obvious implication that we have talked and understood as well, that there is a clear power vacuum in front of us. This inaction, basically when they could not come to a consensus, where they could not come out with a joint declaration, just because one party decided to exit and place their domestic interests ahead of the global community's interests, there is a clear power vacuum where G7 as a bloc has failed. Now, this opens space for other regional blocs such as BRICS, such as G20. Wherever we have member nations such as US in any particular grouping, I think it would lead to inaction yet again. This also leaves a space for India's rise. Now, India has been and it will gain further credibility as a balanced and crisis moderating power. India's stance as a balanced and crisis moderating power, as a neutral power, has been clear in Russia-Ukraine war also, Israel-Hamas conflict also, and yet again in this particular conflict, India's stance is clear, and which gives a lot of power and points to India's credibility. Now, another shift that we particularly see here is the transatlantic strain. So, this term basically comes from the Atlantic Oceans and the continents present on its both sides. So, European Union as well as US. So, European continent is on this side and US is on this side, and we have Atlantic Ocean here. And this transatlantic strain, what we are talking about, European Union on one side and US on the other side, their relationship seemed really warm, but such actions, especially from the side of US and their role, is leading to cool down and drifting apart from each other. And another consequence that becomes rather important for the global order, that we are seeing a shift from unipolar order. US retreat basically highlights that we are moving towards multipolar world order, and the hegemony of any sort that US used to have, that will see a decline. People depending on US will decline because it seems like that they will be erratic, they will be irresponsible in coming times, just like they have been in the recent past as well. And this also clearly leads to some sort of strategic uncertainty, where allies and all sort of adversaries as well, they do not know in what direction the future of US lies, where their commitments are and what direction they will be heading in. I hope you are clear with all the dimensions related to this particular exit. This becomes important to understand in terms of, in dimensions of expected for your exam, and I hope you will let me know in the comment section that why we are seeing this transition from multilateralism to minilateralism and bilateralism. That is all from my side. Thank you so much.